Girl is in the waiting room. Oh no, I thought I said it so you didn't have to do that. Okay. I guess I didn't set it properly. Oh no. Okay, at least I saw it. Okay, welcome. Okay, you don't have to say anything, Daryl. We're just starting up. So just wait 1 minute. Okay, so just sit quietly and wait for everyone to get settled. So you guys sit and I'll be right back.
Sure. I'll look for lessons coming, but a lot of times, if you're go to a Buddhist center and you have like a Geshe teacher, or you want to honor like the photographs and tankas and statues, which for a lot of people is really where the presence of the deities come to you. Like the Buddha comes to you, you can do prostrations if you want to. So to me, to feel like I'm connecting to the teaching, I like to do, I do the half prostrations because I have some medical issues that makes it harder for me to do the other ones, but so I could make it to you, or sound because you're the teacher. No, you're not. Well, okay.
We'll do it together.
Okay.
Do that with
I'll do that. And anybody can do it. So it's it means, this either means, one thing this means is body, speech, and mind. And then I always say to myself, humility and respect when I do that part. And then it could also mean Buddha. What else that other thing means? His body, speech, and mind.
You're purifying your body, speech, and mind.
Right. Okay. Oh, one second.
And there was another form of it, which is very fine. Each country has a slightly different form of their prostration or bow. So that's one to do in Thailand, Sri Lanka. Okay, good. So welcome everybody. Hope you all had a good week. Good to see you again. And so we're on the topic of mindfulness and compassion. And so what we'll do now is start with just a few minutes to center ourselves. And let's see here. We can do, I think, this prayer as well. And we'll open it to the page. So how to say it? It's the page. The easiest way to say it is it's the second to last page. Second to last page of our handouts. That's where we'll open it to first.
Is this the same handout from last week?
It is.
So we should have brought that.
That's okay. We will probably start using a slightly different one because there's another version of this prayer that's just a slightly different translation, but there's a melody, a tune that you can chant with it, and it fits the other translation better. So it would be nice to do a chanting. That's an extra element. Okay, so the second to last page where it's in the bottom it says refuge and bodhicitta motivational prayer.
So here I'll send you the prayers afterwards, okay?
Thank you for that.
I think she's there.
And so I'll just check one more time to make sure there's not someone else waiting, but I think there will be. Okay, looks good. Last time someone was waiting, we didn't know until they called. So we can start with this prayer And so this is refuge and bodhicitta motivational prayer. So as we discussed last time, before we begin any virtuous activity, that we're trying to create something positive, make a positive change in ourselves and in the world, it's important to create an intentional motivation, make a strong motivation. Ultimately, that this action that we do will be of benefit to all living beings. And then if you are, feel a connection to the Buddha as a spiritual teacher, a spiritual guide that you trust, that you want to follow, then you can also recite this prayer of refuge. So if you don't, you're not really like ready to accept the Buddha as sort of the, main spiritual guidance in your life, you don't have to say the prayer, right? You can just think of generating that compassionate motivation. But for those of you, because it seems like most of us here are more or less kind of really interested in Buddhism and like the Buddha as a teacher, then I figured it would be reasonable to do it together. So we can do it in English, and then because today is Losar, the first of the Tibetan New Year, so we'll do it in Tibetan as well. And then we also have some treats for Losar after that. If we had the full presentation, I should show you a photo and have I guess on the phone I can show you later, but the sort of full setup that a Tibetan monastery or even a home would have in it for the New Year, just so you see it. It's nice to see the different cultures. Yeah. Okay, so visualize. So if we want to do the prayer, visualize the Buddha in front of you, radiant, glowing body of golden light, and just with an expression of complete acceptance and love and compassion, really completely just accepting who you are at this moment and recognizing that whatever that is good enough, that we came here, good enough that we have the intention to be a good person, and that we're going to the Buddha as our direction and guidance in life to help us achieve that, to become a better person, be more like the Buddha, more awakened, more empathetic, more aware. Okay, so we just recite the prayer in the English. That's so the verse on the right side on the bottom where it says I go for refuge until enlightenment to the Buddha, the Dharma, and my practice of giving and other perfections. May I attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. I go for refuge until enlightenment to the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. One more time. I go for refuge until enlightenment to the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And I'll just do it once in Tibetan, which some of you know it, and feel free to chant along. Sangye chetan sohi choknam la Kamchu ardu dagni kapsuchi Nagi jinso gite soknam Rola penshir sangye drupa shirsho. Okay, so now imagine that the Buddha comes to your crown, the top of your head, and dissolves, kind of melts into you, merges into you, and you and the Buddha become merged into one nature. So you feel the Buddha's mind becoming your mind becoming Buddha's mind. Feel blessed by that presence of the Buddha inside of you. And if you don't really feel comfortable, thinking of the Buddha, just think of all of the wisdom in the universe. That's now entering inside of you, opening up inside of you. Okay, so we have the practice of mindfulness. And as we discussed briefly last week, there's mindfulness when looked at as the mental faculty, the cognitive faculty that can be used in many different ways. And then there's the contemplative practice of mindfulness. And so this is where the Buddha taught us 4 applications of mindfulness, applying mindfulness to close mindfulness to the body, feelings, the mind, and other phenomena. So we'll start with mindfulness of the body. This is again a good way to just take a break from the constant running chatter in your mind. Because the body is clear, it's here always, always there, as long as we're in this life. And it has certain rhythms to it, like the breathing, the breath has a rhythm to it. So it's an easy focal point. It's consistent. You can trust it. You know it's going to come again the next moment until we die. So put your focus on your breath. And anytime there is a distraction towards anything, memory, a desire, the planning of the future, the sound, the smell, a body ache or pain, concern, a doubt, any kind of distraction that takes you away from that single pointed attention on the breath. Just catch it. So we catch it with the mental faculty called meta awareness. That's checking off. How is our mind behaving? So checking up, we use meta awareness, catch distraction, and then mindfulness is that mental faculty that brings it back and keeps it on the concept, keeps it off the breath. So practice like this for a couple of minutes. today we'll discuss a little bit more about the mind itself. When we're being mindful, practicing mindfulness. And what is the mind? What is mindfulness full of? So to understand the mind, one way is to observe it directly. And so this is where mindfulness of mind comes in. Now this includes learning and reflection as well. But for now, we'll do an observation. So thinking, what's happening right now inside of my mind? So now it's in a way a little easier than mindfulness with breathing of the body, because even when you get distracted, that's still mind. That's also your mind. So the distraction itself becomes an object of your mind. You don't have to say, oh wait, come back to something else, because you are just watching your mind. It's a kind of way of outsmarting your distraction, using it as the object of your focus. And now here, it's important to recognize what we mean by so. We can talk about maybe its definition a little later, but now we just most simple way to think of it and to see it, to observe it, is to say that the mind is our experiences of anything. All experiences are mine. So whatever you experience, whatever comes into the forefront of your consciousness, of your awareness, of your experience, that's what we're looking at. The movements of mind as different objects come before it. Thoughts, again, whether it's within one of the five sensory domains, visual, eye, ear, nose, tongue, or body, or if it's a thought in the mental domain, right? Thought, a memory, an emotion, fear, anxiety, anything like that. Doesn't matter if it's pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, just observe what's happening in your mind. So you have to really do a bit of a 180 to turn the awareness on awareness itself. Practice like this for the next few minutes. Okay. So let's open our eye, come back to our sense consciousnesses, the sensory domains of experience. You may have already by having a natural sense. Hello, welcome. Yes. Come on in.
This is Chelsea.
Chelsea, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Losang. Yeah, you
Right,
can
so
sit.
it was very simple.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can sit. Yeah. Okay. Good. Great. So good. Oh, right. You know, right? Okay. So, so a good general, attitude to take towards practicing mindfulness is an attitude of curiosity, especially when we're doing mindfulness of mind, or mindfulness of feelings, but even mindfulness of the body. You know, curiosity. What is in my experience? Like I said last week, one of the reasons that even though mindfulness can be applied to any, right, mindfulness is part of it's a cognitive faculty. We all have it, and we can all strengthen it and apply it to pinning our mind towards any object, right? When we're visualizing the Buddha, like we did at the very beginning, mindfulness is doing that, right? That's mindfulness. That's the basis for concentration. So even when we, at work, I have to answer emails, I have to focus on the spreadsheet or whatever you do. If you're teaching, you have to focus on the lesson, what the students are doing. Mindfulness is active and all of those, and we can strengthen it uh, through a specific practice. So when the Buddha taught these 4 applications of mindfulness, right, it's in a way thinking about thinking, it's in a way it's like thinking about, okay, so you know the bigger framework here of the Buddhist whole teaching, right? How to really deliver an ordinary person, you and me, to a state of lasting peace and happiness that's never going to that's never going to go back to suffering and fear and anxiety and dissatisfaction. So that means that we have to look at, well, what is suffering? Right? That's the first noble truth. This is the truth of suffering. Right? What is suffering? And it includes more than just aches and pains, loss, meeting something at once. Now, of course, that's generally what we identify as suffering in the ordinary world. The Buddha was not an ordinary worldly person. So he identified suffering to be much broader, including the whole basis for our existence, in the sense of the whole sense that there's an I that is somehow sectioned off from the rest of the world in this little box of my body and mind as an independent, isolated I, right? Or their soul. I mean, when you then go into different religious, philosophical, explanations of what it means to be a human, then you have ideas like soul, in the Indian philosophical heritage, Atma, and you have ideas of free will and the Western philosophical heritage. All these things, the Buddha said, no, unnatural, right? No free will, right? No, wait, not no. That's a different question. We don't need to go into it. Not no free will in a. I mean, there's different kinds of free will. So no libertarian free will. No. There's no isolated, independent I that can make a decision. There is a complex of positive conditions within which we have freedom, right? We have a degree of freedom. That's the point being that the basis for our whole existence is this grasping at a self that is inherent, intrinsic inside of me, independent inside of me, that doesn't rely on changing causes and conditions. But what are the changing causes and conditions that the I actually relies on? There is an I. right? I'm talking now. You're looking at me. You're all listening. There's a you. There's an I. We're different. You have your experiences. I have my experiences. So there's an I, but it's an I that is more or less a conceptualization, label, in other words, right? Labeled on the basis of our body. So the Buddha describes the body and mind by listing out 5 aggregates, aggregates, 5 heaps of psychophysical factors, right? 5 aggregates, the word, but just 5, collections of parts of us, right? 5 different groupings of parts of us. Okay, body is one. That's the first one. Called the form aggregate. Body. Form aggregate means body. And our sensory, that's eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and our tactile sensing faculties, our nerves, right? Pervade the entire body. So the last 4, so we have, even though we say body and mind, the Buddha described in these 5 aggregates, 5 groupings. So then the last 4 are all in the mind. Okay? So that's feeling, discrimination, all compositional factors, and then consciousness. Okay. So just to give a very rough introduction, this is really coming back to mindfulness and the 4 applications of mindfulness. But what are these 5 aggregates? Well, the form is the body, and the 5 sensory faculties, 5 systems of sensory perception. And then the mind includes feelings. That simply means, what did we say last week? Remember?
Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral.
Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. In other words, what's more commonly called in modern cognitive psychology, affect. Different, what we call the valence, right? Valence is affect. Pleasant valence, unpleasant valence, neutral valence. Yeah, affect. So that's feeling aggregate, right? It's an aggregate. It's a collection of feelings throughout our life, and in any given moment, in any given day, whatever slice of person you take in time, whatever slice of time you take, there's a variety of affect, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral things happening. Maybe you have a little pain in your lower back, but you're listening to some good music. You have pleasant, unpleasant at the same time. There's different domains of consciousness. Yeah. So that's one collection of parts of one collection of it's like parts of I, the 5 attributes. One collection, one piece. Here. The next one is the discrimination. Now, this is more just identification. Okay. See, this is a black color, this is a white color, right? There's women, there's men, there's red, right? There's a square shape, a round shape. Just the discrimination. And then going beyond that, those are simple discriminations of simple visual objects, but everything, that's an example. It goes into everything that we are able to identify, right? So identifying this claim is true, that claim is false. This is a good, a virtuous, a positive action, that's a negative, harmful action. If I lie, that creates suffering. If I tell the truth, that creates happiness. Refrain from lying, that creates happiness. All those things, the aspect of them, which is making a clear, it doesn't have to be clear, but making some kind of distinction, identifying something, that's called a discrimination. That's one collection of the parts of I, parts of me. Then there's form is the body, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors. So this includes quite a lot of things, okay? So basically, every other psychological component, all these cognitive faculties, like mindfulness, like concentration itself, right? Like wisdom itself, or the negative one, craving, right? Attachment, the self-centered attitude, all these different psychological factors, or mental faculties. These are all included within this heap, this big, they're called heaps or aggregates because they're a big collection of different kinds of things, right? Our body is a big collection of different things. There's billions and trillions of particles, right? There's 5 completely different systems of sensory perception, so it's a heap of different things. Likewise, the feelings include many different kinds of, even though it's just in one way it's simple, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, but there's still infinite variety, right? You know, the actual felt experiences we have vary immensely between day to day, from one part of our life to the next, between one person and another person. So the same with discriminations. We have discriminations of infinite kinds of objects. Someone says that, you know, I don't know that. What's the topic that people are interested in general? And we were just talking about cars. Okay, so someone says the claim. Okay, cars use gasoline, right, ice cars, internal combustion engine cars use, create more greenhouse gas emissions than electric cars. Someone else says no, electric cars create more overall. Okay, that's a claim. So all the, the identification of the meaning of that, then being able to distinguish. Okay, no, this one has more evidence, that one has more evidence, which is true. Those are discrimination. Then the compositional factors. So there's again infinite variety, a big heap of things, a big aggregate. Compositional factors, likewise. All when we're making that kind of analysis, the actual analytical mind, that's called wisdom. That's called wisdom. The mind that's the cognitive faculty that's making the analysis is called wisdom. Cognitive faculty that keeps the object appearing again and again in our experience. So we have a continuity over time. Mindfulness, right? Concentration keeps it single pointed on there without going to other objects. Concentration. So all of those are compositional factors. Okay? The fifth one is just consciousness. Now this is referring now to just the domains of consciousness, like we talked about last week. Okay, so consciousness is a little simpler actually. The eye, the visual consciousness, the auditory or ear consciousness, the olfactory or nose consciousness, the gustatory or tongue consciousness, the body, tactile consciousness, and the mind, mental. So those are the 5 aggregates. Now, why did we bring those into the discussion? Because our practice of mindfulness and these 4 applications of mindfulness, the reason why it's so poignant, so effective to teach these 4, even though mindfulness can be applied to any object. This is how we get in touch with who we are, right? What is this being that suffers? What is my suffering about? How do we understand our suffering? By understanding our 5 aggregates, right? That's what leads us to understand, well, why do I have so many unpleasant feelings, right? Where are they coming from? Well, then we look at the compositional factors that we have, the different cognitive factors. Well, I have all this irritation. I'm getting irritated constantly at people and yelling at them and criticizing them and blaming them. It's causing me so much suffering. Right? So we see a connection between our way of thinking and then the actions, that verbal and physical actions that come out of it, and the feelings we have. Right? So it gives us an insider's look, right, at what really makes up me, the human being, right, as a human being. Not through, looking through a microscope, right? Not through dissecting the body with knives and seeing what organs are there, how the veins and arteries and capillaries are structured, just through direct observation. Okay. So that's in a sense why the Buddhist tradition is actually extremely scientific. In some sense, more than science, in the way that at least for looking at what is a human being, right? It's really applying empirical observation, like really direct, radical empirical observation. Whereas the scientific, at least, it's diverse, of course, but the general kind of scientific tradition is that, as it exists today, if you're really making a valid observation, then you have to be observing something that could be verified by a third party. Someone else has to be able to make the exact same observation. Well, when we're talking about ourselves, that's impossible. That's just impossible. No one else can see your 5 aggregates. They can see your body aggregate, right? That's the only one. And even that, they can't experience it the way that we can, that you yourself can, right? That's only for you to do through your mind. So the four applications of mindfulness give us this insider's look, and that's even the term. I think I mentioned it maybe, but Geshe-Tuke mentioned it when he was here a few weeks ago. The Tibetan word, usually we translate it as Buddhist. It's literally an insider. The word is just the word for inside, and then a personalizing part of it. Okay? And that means insider doesn't mean like, insider trading, like you're like you have secrets or something else. It means you're looking, you're observing, investigating what's on the inside of our experience, right? The inside of the person, looking from the inside. Okay, so that's what it means to be a Buddhist. Someone who's really, you can say many things about it, but that's the literal Tibetan word that is used to describe a Buddhist. It's really saying someone who's looking on the inside of themselves, researching from the inside up, from the inside in. Good. Okay. Let's see. So now I do want to discuss a little bit more about what the mind means, what the mind is. I wonder, could I grab that clock? I forgot to put. I can see it, but not that well. Won't fall back. Make sure I'm keeping it on the time, and it's a little too small for me to see from far away. Great. Okay, so even though, since we're sort of not really switching direction majorly, but kind of start a different explanation about the mind, are there any questions or comments about what we did in the short meditation, or what we just talked about?
I have a question about the prayer we did.
Great.
I'm
Actually, I'm gonna say real quick, it's a Tibetan idea, and it makes sense to me too. Just part of the custom that we don't put any prayers on the ground, so I can collect them back while we're not using them. That's probably the easiest thing to probably. Yeah. And the idea here is that honestly, I'll say, what people you need to see it for your question, right?
Well,
Okay.
yeah,
Oh, sure.
I'm not familiar with that word.
Okay.
I understand the
Got
other.
you. Oh, just the question is what is hunger? Okay,
Mhm.
awesome. I can answer that as best of my ability. So just to say about not keeping things on the floor, Tibetans actually they won't let any printed word touch the ground. They have that much respect for the written word, for language. And the reason is because that's sort of the container through which you pass on wisdom, right? Language is this unique human feature, right? A lot of people, historians, anthropologists today identify, right, the sort of cognitive revolution that allowed humans to become the most powerful creatures on planet Earth happened because of language, right? So it's our sort of most powerful gift, right? Most powerful, you could say, technology, language. So the Tibetans are acknowledging that, Tibetan culture in general, has a deep respect for not just for language, but then because the written word is, that's the container for language, right? Put down your ideas, your words into a text, and then someone else can read it and understand. I would say that, it's certainly, it's probably also related to how, for most of Tibetan history, it was very difficult to produce written material. These days, up quick, you got 50 sheets of printed pages in 2 minutes. We take for granted a little bit how easy, it is to have printed material, and then easy to forget about, not hold that kind of constant attitude of respect. But it's a nice practice to try saying, oh, this is, if I want to change my mind, if I want to follow the Buddhist teaching, well, this is the Buddhist teaching. Let me always, it's a another mindfulness practice, right? Mindfulness of the benefit, the power of Buddhist teaching by recognizing, oh, this is a a representation or an incarnation of the Buddhist teaching. Yeah. Think of it that way. So that was just our tangent. So what does Sangha mean?
Well,
So
thank you for sharing that with us.
sure, sure. Yeah, and it's something that's I honestly, it's very hard for me. It really was a mindfulness practice when I, first heard that perspective and realized how often I put, the books on the floor, or you're also not supposed to put other things. Like you don't put like your bowl of cereal or your Dharma book or your coffee mug or whatever. So, but it really, I noticed how many times I do it completely not thinking of it. Think of it as a coaster.
So I've seen
yeah,
the word
word
before,
Sangha.
but I don't have a really good.
Sure. So Sangha is one of the three jewels. So when we do a refuge and bodhicitta prayer, so the Tibetan tradition combines the refuge and bodhicitta into one prayer. There are other traditions of Buddhism where they do a refuge prayer, and there, some of you sure have heard, it's recited as Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Sangham Saranam Gacchami. So it means basically the same thing. That's what refuge to the Buddha, to the Dharma, to the Sangha. Now, refuge here means recognizing that these three jewels is, maybe not the most, I don't know, it's a fine translation. Not from the Tibetan means something a little different, but Sanskrit seems to be basically the same word that you would use for a jewel. So, fine, the three jewels. Why are they jewels? Well, this now we can use the Tibetan word to explain it, because the Tibetan word is two syllables which each have a different meaning. The first means rare, very rare, and the second means sort of the most supreme or highest. So the three jewels are rare. In other words, they're precious, hard to find, and then they're also higher. Now, in what sense? Higher than other sources of refuge or protection. So protection here means protection from what we don't want, what we fear, suffering, in all its forms. So whatever we really don't want, whatever we're most afraid of, well, that's a form of suffering. That's included all the way down to, like we're talking about this whole basis for being in cyclic existence. But I haven't brought that word in yet, but now this is the idea that we have repeatedly, we repeatedly take birth after we die because of the power of our afflictions and ignorance. Propels us, and the karma that we accumulate out of that ignorance propels us to take birth again and again. So, in order to get out of that whole situation, so even right, when we practice mindfulness of these four ways of four applications of mindfulness, we understand from the inside who I am, what is this person, what are these five aggregates. That makes us understand what is samsara. How am I creating this sort of repeated cycle of suffering? And to get out of it, we have to find a source of protection. Okay, so the Buddha, the Dharma is Pali, Dharma is Sanskrit, and it's very, very close. It's old Indian languages. And the Sangha, those three, right? Those are the sources of our protection. In what way? Well, it's great to use an analogy. So there's a lovely analogy that makes perfect sense. So it's like thinking of a doctor, medicine, and then nurses. So the Buddha is like a doctor because he's the one that prescribes the medicine. In other words, he teaches how to end this cycle of suffering, cyclic existence. He teaches us how to get in touch and become aware of who we are, our five aggregates, right? How to strengthen our virtuous qualities, those mental faculties that make us happier, that make us have more mental strength, more resilience, more wisdom. more compassion, right? He teaches us all these things that brings us happiness, ends our suffering. He's the teacher, like a doctor prescribing treatment or medicine. The dharma or dhamma is then the medicine. Right? So that's what we have to actually take. In other words, we have to apply it in our mind, in our experience. We have to cultivate. Right? Here is the word. So even though we're just talking about having respect for the language, for the word, that's one aspect of dharma, but there are two. There's it's called the transmitted dharma. Transmitted dharma is the word. Okay. Then there's the accomplished dharma. The accomplished dharma is what we actually do in our mind. That's not the word. So that's the real rest, the accomplished dharma that we increase our mindfulness. We make our mind more compassionate, transform our mind into a compassionate. That's dharma. Okay. Transform our ignorance into wisdom. That's dharma. Sangha then, so that's like medicine. Sangha are like nurses. So those are people. Those are other people who have just done at least a little bit of this process of achieving, actualizing the Dharma, right? They've accomplished some of this mental transformation, or all of it. Like the Buddha also is included, right? Like, as a helper there. But then, other kind of more highly developed practitioners of the Sangha. That's the genuine Sangha. We say sort of a representation of a Sangha, just like for the Dharma, a representation of the Dharma is the words, even though the real Dharma is your own consciousness, what you accomplish in your mind, what you experience in your mind. Likewise, for the Sangha, the real Sangha, are beings who genuinely achieve some of these deeper realization, deeper transformation. But we say what the representative Sangha is any community of 4 or more fully ordained persons. So that's we use the word bhikshu, the net male or bhikshu. So any community of people, 4 or more people living together who hold those vows, that's considered a representation of the vow. And that's essentially, because the vows themselves, right, the monastic vows, are like if someone's living, holding them properly and holding them well, they're basically acting like a person who has real realization would. Even if they, I don't have any actual, deeper realization of Dharma. But if I at least practice the vows well, I'm more or less copying the behavior of someone who does. Even though it's hard, even though it's not natural because I don't actually have it, it's still okay. So that's sort of why. And then there's also different communal practices they do together. That's why you need a community of at least 4 that sort of make it so that the Dharma can really be sustained in that community. Okay, so that is the Sangha, one of the 3 jewels. So it doesn't have to be a monk or nun, just so you're aware, right? That make that very clear. Anyone can become Sangha, just like you can become Buddha, right? First, to become Buddha, first you have to become Sangha. Like the earlier stages of spiritual development are already a Sangha, but you're not yet. That's true.
So, but when would you also use Dharma to refer to any practice of like the Buddha's original, how Sanskrit forms what the Buddha said,
Right.
or like the books that shows in books about Dharma with any book. I mean, I knew it was words, but how to manifest this book, a teaching from a teacher, like what I'm talking from you, and that's all the thing.
Right. Any linguistic based form expressing the realized or the accomplished Dharma is transmitted Dharma. Right? Anything is transmitted Dharma because it goes from the Buddha down to his disciples and then from them down to their disciples. Right? So they learn, listen, they have their mental experience of what the teacher taught, right? Then they rephrase it or explain it again to someone else. So it's like it's going. That's why we use the expression a Dharma wheel, Dharma wheel is like what the Buddha himself, he taught three Dharma wheels, the Dharma cycle. Right? Turning, have you heard of the expression turning the wheel of Dharma?
Mhm.
The first sutra the Buddha taught called the Dharma cycle. Right? Sutra turning the wheel. So why is it a wheel, right? Why is it called a cycle or a wheel? Well, because it's going from teacher to disciple, and then disciple, so it's moving along, like a wheel. Right? Again, it's not, you're not transmitting, it's not the accomplished dharma, the realization, someone's consciousness that's moving, but it's the word. So that's the transmitted dharma. So yeah, a book, a recording, a video, right? Even, if you're talking to a friend, but you're really giving them, Buddhist, something that the Buddha taught, giving advice based on that, becomes the same thing.
I think there'd be some line there about like me talking about it and not having the exact correct interpretation and explaining it to someone else. Is that teaching the Dharma? Because if I don't have the perfect understanding, like, isn't there some delineation of it has to be an authentic teaching by, translated by someone who understands the translation? Isn't there some line there about?
Yeah, I mean, when we really, again, in our system of study, I don't think we really talk about it much. Anyway, in our system of study, you go into a lot of detail, into a lot of philosophical questions, you know, philosophical that are related to Buddhism, and this is one of them. And we debate them, right? We actually spend the bulk of our time in the monastery, roughly 5 hours a day, debating. So this is a good question to debate. What is the definition really of dharma, of realized the dharma, transmitted dharma, dharma wheel? What each of them has a different definition. How do you set that boundary? So I would say, yeah, I would agree with that based on what I came out of that that study and debate with that understanding is, yeah. So it would have to be, what we say is, for something to be dharma, it has to be what's called different English translations will come, but let's call it for now non-fictional speech. Non-fictional speech means, do you remember the definition? Melinda came to our debate program.
I can look at my book and
Yeah, we had a debate, a 1 month long debate and logic program in November last year that she was present at, and this was one of the topics we looked at. So, but it would have to be non-fictional speech, means that it is a speech for which the speaker of it, right, understands its meaning valid. Just look at that. But that can happen. I mean, so you can do that. Oh, not like if maybe you start talking about emptiness and things that are really deeper than than we really understand. But if you just say, look, practicing generosity is going to make you happier, going to, like gonna help you let go of your miserliness and your greed, and then you'll be more, happy. You probably really understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
This is what when we talk about a Dharma teacher, and this is in the Lamrim Tenmo, the treatise, the great treatise of the state of the path to enlightenment by Tsongkhapa, who is depicted and who is actually representing him, the people in the back room there. That's right. Mindfulness works, right? You heard the year, and you heard the meaning. The yogi path, which is also what he and so that text, it talks about, and he's mostly referencing a text by Maitreya, which was written much earlier, sometime in the fourth, fifth century. That talks about the 10 qualities of a Mahayana teacher. Okay? Now, it's great for someone to have all 10. I mean, that's wonderful, and really should make an effort to search for someone who has all 10. But Lama Tsongkhapa clarifies in great treatise, Lama Chenmo, that really the most important quality. Two things. One, the teacher has some knowledge greater than the student, and they have genuine love, loving concern for the student. So those are like the two minimum qualities, right? So, it's like to be like sort of intro to Dharma, intro to Buddhism, you know, teacher. I mean, you don't have to think of it that way, but it qualifies, right? If you know something a little more than your friend and you have genuine loving concern for them, that qualifies by those regards.
So what would be the difference between a Buddha and an Arahant?
Oh, there we go. That's a great question. Now we're getting into.
We don't have to talk about that if it's ridiculously complicated.
No,
in Theravada, it's pretty simple,
right.
but it sounds like it's different.
No, I don't think it's. I'm not sure exactly how different it is. I just meant maybe that's introducing terms that not everyone's familiar with, but it's not ridiculously complicated. So an arahant, or Sanskrit arhat, is someone who has abandoned samsara. That means that they've achieved liberation or nirvana, moksha or nirvana. Okay. That means that to do that, they've abandoned self-grasping ignorance, as well as contaminated karma that comes from it. Okay. In other words, the 12 links. So it's getting to a lot of terms, but anyway, they've abandoned suffering. That's the simple form. They've abandoned suffering. Now a Buddha, right? Like Shakyamuni Buddha. Okay. Buddha or Tara, Guan Yin, right? Guan Yin sometimes called the Bodhisattva, sometimes Buddha. A Buddha is someone who not only has abandoned their own suffering, but has developed their capacity to be of benefit to others to the highest possible extent. Again, that's why the three jewels, they're rare and they're the highest. The highest what? The highest capacity to benefit, to bring benefit to people. Right? So the Buddha has, and then there's within different philosophical traditions, there's different understandings of, well, what does that sort of mean? That so what kind of mind does the Buddha have? Some traditions say, well, that means then the Buddha is omniscient. Buddha is aware of all phenomena, has a direct experience of all phenomena. That's how, there's nothing unclear to a Buddha's mind, nothing unknown to a Buddha's mind. That's how they're able to benefit others so well. They can see exactly what a person needs in order to guide them properly to the next step of their spiritual journey. So there's even teachers I've seen. I've seen it in books. I haven't met with them and talked with them, but there's some reason to it that say things like, well, actually, all the major world religions were taught by emanations of Buddha. That they're teaching for a specific kind of person. What's going to get them more spiritually mature, right? More calm, more compassionate, more caring for others, more content, more patient, right? And all religions do teach that. Now, of course, unfortunately, because destructive emotions and distorted perceptions our habit towards those are so strong, it's very easy to pervert, right, a teaching and make it into a source of suffering. Very easy. So that happens too. But I think if we look at the vast majority of people who really focus on their religion, whatever religion it is, I see, I don't see everything, but from what I see, it seems like it's really causing more help than harm. Other people don't believe that. That's what it seems like to me. You look at this, the majority in numbers, people who are able to really, develop some inner discipline, more kindness, more care for others based on their religion, more, really do it in a good way, use their religion for something good, than to cause more harm. Anyway, that's quite a tangent from the question. A good question. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And the way that we explain it, really simply, again, just terms that aren't simple, but just to say a simple sentence, an arhat has eliminated the afflictive obscurations, but does still have cognitive obscurations, whereas a Buddha has eliminated both afflictive obscurations and cognitive obscurations. So just leave that there. And then if you want to go into the philosophy a little deeper at some point, then that's one way to look at it.
I mean, like each sentence to say basically could be easily be a whole class.
Right.
Yeah, but it's how Buddhism works. It's they call it. This is why I love it and why I love the opportunity to study in the depth that we do. You know, they call it the open ocean of God, and it's like an ocean because it's so profound, which just means that you keep going and you keep going and you keep trying to reach the bottom and you just never do. It just keeps going deeper and deeper. And this is the same with even the simple practice of those 4 applications of mindfulness. Mindfulness of body, mindfulness of mind. The Buddha did say that through mindfulness, you achieve liberation. So does that mean literally that that's the only practice you can ever learn? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But it definitely indicates to me that the more you do it, the deeper it goes, right? Okay. So, wow, that's good. I wondered, maybe we'll talk a little bit about mind very briefly. So let me ask a question of you. Does anyone here feel or think or believe that the brain is the mind, or the mind is the brain? It's okay. That's a question. sort of, right?
Yeah,
Sort of.
it's my thinking is evolving.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So a belief in transition.
Let's talk about the formation of consciousness. In our experience, it can't occur without a brain, right? If you have a traumatic brain injury and there's no neurochemical, no activity in your brain, you're not thinking, you're not a conscious being. So there is an association, you think about from science and how they are trying to define consciousness between those two things, the physical brain and being a conscious entity. So that's where I get stuck a lot of times with this concept of consciousness from the Buddhist perspective of this on the wind, right? This kind of ill-defined for me, term about what consciousness is, because without the brain, there's no activity for us to cognize anything.
Good. Right.
I don't know if you follow this or not, but from my understanding, there's a growing consensus among physicists who like to think about this stuff. The mind is the quantum mechanical wave function. That is, it's not an electromagnetic wave that we can measure with physical instruments, but it is a wave consisting of what you would call consciousness along with an orthogonal probability distribution. I'm sorry, a wave that you would call karma, with an orthogonal probability distribution, which determines how that's going to manifest. And it's a non-spatial, non-temporal wave. So it exists throughout all time and space, but it's only going to manifest determined by its probability distribution. And I think it's consistent with Buddhist teachings, and I think it's becoming pretty mainstream in physics.
Thank you very much. Good answer. Okay. Good. So great. Thank you for sharing. So yeah, there's a lot of questions about right? What is mind? And different ideas of what it is, how to best identify it, locate it. Some start from a perspective that it must necessarily be vocalized. And not only localized, but identifiable, some material, materially observable, entity, right? The brain or brain state or a combination of brain states. No, one way that's commonly said by psychologists and neuroscience, right, is that the mind is what the brain does. Okay. The ideas that go more into physics and quantum non-determinacy, indeterminacy, which is the wave function without going into detail because I could go into a little bit of detail, maybe 2 more sentences, and after that, I won't even know what I'm talking about. so, but maybe just the short form, in quantum mechanics and physics, modern day physics is quantum mechanics, right? Quantum mechanics, right? Phenomena, especially particles, are before they're observed, they're in a state called superposition. Okay, superposition means that essentially, right, there's an associated wave function. Essentially, it just means there's no certainty. It's impossible to have certainty about where they're located. In other words, exactly what state they're in. And so Blair is suggesting or sharing the view that consciousness itself is in somewhat of a similar condition, right? So kind of spread out, indeterminate superposition of states, and then it can manifest into a determined state, because due to some condition for electrons and photons, it's by being observed. I'm not sure if it would be similar to the mind. So that's the view. Okay. There's a lot of other views, right? There's sort of basic view that, well, there's a mind in here, sort of a watcher. Okay, a watcher. That's sort of separate from, an experiencer, a watcher. That's sort of separate from, the basic, sensory experiences I'm having, the thoughts and feelings I'm having. But there's something else that's sort of deeper down, or, the real mind. Okay, this is a view of, again, it's common in our culture. It kind of goes back to the James had a view like this, as well as the Advaita Vedanta, Indian philosophy. Okay. So the Buddhist view is different, and there's different views of Buddhism too, but mostly they're more or less aligned. And so it sort of goes back to what we were talking about when we did the meditation. We'll do a little more of it before we close today. But we want to define mind. Okay. Now this is something to just keep in mind in general. When you define something, Buddhism, in the philosophical strain, strand that you're more familiar with, there's a lot of definitions. There's a definition of, that Dharma wheel, of the transmitted Dharma, of the realized Dharma, definition for everything. But when we define something, you have to recognize that it's not just a matter of learning the description, in other words, words to describe something. You actually need to develop what we could say an embodied experience of it. You need to really bring it into your mind, your reflection, enough so that you're really understanding like what it's pointing at, not so although the analogy, the finger pointing to the moon, you want to actually look at the moon. You're not looking at the finger. So that's what it's like when we define mind, as I'm about to do. Remember that it's getting at something that, again, you want to understand in an embodied way, in a correct way. Okay, so what is the definition? Experience, clear, and aware. That's it. Experience, clear, and aware. That's the definition of mind. It's equivalent with consciousness. Mind and consciousness are the same thing. Okay, so just quickly going into each term. Experience, like we were saying, just to indicate that whatever is happening within the part of you that cannot be seen by others, right? That's experience. The part of you that is the hearing, the seeing, the smelling, the tasting, the tactile, the thinking, the emotion, right? The feeling of compassion when you see someone suffer, the feeling of anger when someone insults you, criticizes you. Those are all concepts of mind. Experience. Clear. Clear means that it is essentially not an object without extension. Okay? An object without physical extension. In other words, it's non-physical. Okay? Has no extension in space. It has extension in time. No extension in space. Extension in time is very important. So when we look at something like a table, we can divide it into its parts. It has top, leg, divide each part into smaller parts, cut it in half, cut it into quadrants, keep going until we get to the particles, the molecules, until we get to the atoms, we get to the protons, neutrons, electrons, and then all the fundamental particles below. The mind cannot be divided into spatial components like that are located in space. Instead, it's divided over time. You can divide it in different ways. I'm talking about, there's a main mind, right? Visual consciousness, and then within that, many different cognitive faculties. So you can divide it like that, but those aren't in space, right? You're just reflecting on, well, what are the components of this particular experience? Oh, well, there's some mindfulness there. There's some concentration. There's a pleasant feeling. You're just dividing out based on the function, right? Cognitive functions. That's not dividing something by space, but we can divide mind by time. So you have the only reason we can have mind is because there's a continuity over time. And the only reason meaning our mind that's just what it is. It's a collection of moments over time experience. So it's clear. Now you might say, well, a mirror is clear. So that's another thing, right? Non-physical, but it also has this capacity to reflect whatever appears before it. So whatever kind of object there is, it can appear in the experiential space of mind. In other words, anything you can think of, anything you can see, hear, observe. Mind is, in other words, it's an open arena for objects to be experienced. Clear. Okay, so but it's not like a mirror, because even though a mirror can reflect any object that appears before it, so it's similarly clear, but it's not aware. Okay. Mind is also aware or knowing. So that's the feature that really makes it experiential. It makes it so that we're different from ChatGPT. I mean, there's probably many ways in which we are, but ChatGPT, no, of course I could be wrong about this because I can't even see your mind, right? So, okay, maybe it has a mind, but let's just say, or more simple, table, piece of paper, right? We have, or the mirror, right? We have both the ability to, our minds have the ability to reflect, be open to any object appearing within the space of the mind. But we also have awareness, there's knowledge, there's knowing. Even I'm not talking about knowledge now in the sense of like knowing that 5 times 5 is 25 and not 20, just that there's some experiential cognitive, knowing. And it's not a separate knowing, it's different from the view I just mentioned of the advanced of the changes. Not separate, just that the visual experience of seeing color itself is knowing those colors and shapes, right? Knowing, identifying who a person is, my brother, my sister, my friend, my boss, coworker, whatever. Just knowing it, right? Just knowing, experiencing. Experience, clear, and aware. So that means it's different from those views of other Indian philosophers. Some also were Indian philosophical schools, still are, who think that the mind is also physical, right? That it's a physical entity. So what's the problem with that view? Well, simplest way to say, if we really equate mind with the brain, right? Now, there's other ways of having physical view of mind. It doesn't do that, but let's take that. If you really just say mind is the brain, then, well, they're completely one and not different at all. When you look at the brain, you would be looking at the mind, right? That means that you would necessarily, the more you know about the brain, you would know about a person's mind. But not just about it, you would actually be seeing, right? I mean, when you see a brain, you're seeing the brain. If that is the mind, right, then you'd be seeing the mind. That means you'd be seeing the person's experiences. You'd be, in other words, experiencing what they're experiencing. That is not how neuroscience works. In fact, it's still an extremely dense black box in many, many areas. You know, what kind of conscious state is correlated to a neurological state? Now, what about the claim that the mind is what the brain does? Well, now we just have to ask, well, what does that mean exactly? What it does, right? Okay, you say, well, writing is what a pen does. What does that really mean, right? I mean, the letters that appear on the piece of paper, do those exist at the same time as the pen? Question.
Oh, is that what I thought?
No.
I mean, the pen.
The pen which writes the letters.
It's existing, and then the letters that are written are existing, and they are.
So it's existing and then the letters.
No,
In other words, the
but
pen.
it's continuous, the letters are existing at the same time. As continuous.
So then is the pen that wrote the first line of A the same? Is it existing simultaneously with the pen that writes the second line of the A?
No.
No, because it's already seized, right? It's integrated because it's an impermanent phenomenon. Impermanent just means something that's constantly disintegrated. Okay. So the pen that wrote this line existed before this line. The pen that wrote this line existed before. In other words, there's a causal relation. They're not simultaneous. So when you say that, X is what Y does, right? Well, what you're really saying is X is the result of Y. So then it's just simply saying that mind is the result of the brain activity. Well, sure. There's no problem saying that. Yeah. The result, not it, right? They're not one and the same. So yeah, but definitely the Buddhist view accept that the mind results from the brain. The human mind, right? Of course, you have minds and other beings and that necessarily maybe don't necessarily have to have a brain. That's still sort of a question. But for humans, for sure. And then even, for humans, there are some exceptional, some curious, data points, in other words, anomalies that still really make it difficult to completely, accept something like that. But anyway, point being, when we're actually trying to identify what is mind itself, okay, we're not asking about what's causing it, right? That's one of the, we talked about last week, one of the three necessary conditions. Okay. So there's a condition that we need to have a working, the working physiology, right? The working system of sensory perception, including the brain. That's one condition. Then we need the object condition. And then we need this connecting condition of a prior moment of consciousness. Okay, so mind then is experience, clear, and aware. And like I said, to understand the definition, we need more than just memorizing it and repeating it. We need to really sit and look. What is this experience, clear, and aware? Get a sense of it. So that's where our mindfulness of mind meditation can go. Okay, so let's do another 5 minutes before we close of mindfulness on mind, thinking about the definition. And I know I didn't address Blair's postulation, the postulate of mind being a type of
Quantum wave function.
a wave function. So that I think would, to put it simply, that view itself doesn't necessarily imply that the mind is a physical entity. So, like Blair said, it could actually be compatible with what we're saying now. It's just, but it's again, it's sort of looking at maybe mind in another angle. It's not saying that mind isn't experience, right? It's not saying that mind isn't fear. Just trying to sort of explain again, sort of more like how it comes into process. Okay, so I would say sit with your spine straight. The main instruction when you're looking at the meditation posture, straight spine. And now think of the definition, experience, clear, and aware. But then look at your own mind. Try and go through your 6 different domains of consciousness, right? Eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and the mental mind, mental consciousness. Try and get a sense, a felt sense of what this definition is pointing to. My own experiences that are clear, they're nothing more than experience, knowing, awareness, not getting caught up and thinking about, oh, there must be this neurotransmitter being released, this chemical, this neuron fire. Not getting caught up in that kind of picture of the brain, because that's going to distract you from mindfulness of mind. We're looking at the experience itself. Spend 5 minutes sort of, rotating through your different domains of consciousness and getting a sense of this experience. Okay, so come back and recite final prayer. Do stitch. Okay, so remembering the importance of directing the positive energy that we created towards an ultimate goal, right? The most long-lasting, far-reaching benefit we can imagine. What is that? Complete awakening, complete freedom of all forms of suffering for all living beings. In other words, awakening for all living beings. May all beings everywhere plagued by sufferings of body and mind attain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merit. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be free. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Thank you so much, everybody, and hope to see you again next week. But before you go, if you have time, today is the first of the new year for the Tibetan calendar, Losang, first of Losang. And so we have some cup day that was made at DNKL, the center in Reading, Connecticut. I happened to go there yesterday, so they gave me a bag of cup day, which is they're like little cookies. So they do have gluten, they're flour. Okay, so the flour and they're also fried. So they're vegan. They are I think so. I honestly don't know if they have butter or not. I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
I never even thought of it.
Yeah.
And I've never made. Well, I did try making them once.
They have oil
Yeah,
from eating.
just
in
the way
past.
they kind
Yeah,
of taste, consistency. Yeah, I could probably find out if you really want to.
No, no, I
Okay.
don't.
Oh, okay.
You made a little
And
butter.
then butter tea, which is definitely not vegan because it has butter. And this is a Tibetan traditional. The traditional tea has butter and salt.
Regular tea and.
Except if you haven't had it before, I would recommend trying just a little bit. Partly because I'm not the expert in making it. It might not be the best one, but also just because even if it's made really well, it's sort of acquired taste. Yeah. And it's a special recipe too, by the way. There's a Kalmykian. So Kalmyk is a part of Russia that it's a Buddhist republic in Russia that is really more culturally Mongolian. So there's a Kalmykian man he passed away just a few months ago, but I was friends with, and he taught me this recipe for butter tea. They make it a little something like that.
You have mentioned that you would have a photograph of
Yeah.
the New Year.
Okay, bye. Who's there? Daryl, right? Okay, bye, Daryl. Thank you. We're gonna have some treats. So hopefully you can come in person. Okay.